In this module, we will cover the essential elements necessary to create process documentation that works and that stands the test of time. What do we mean by documentation? In order to improve results, we have to make changes. All improvement requires change, but not all change results in improvement. Documentation is the content that you provide the people in the process or the customer of the process to help them be more successful with their process, the product, and the service. Regardless of whether you are working in software development, making lawnmowers, working in a hospital or hotel, your process documentation is an important part of employee engagement and customer satisfaction. And as you might guess, the majority of people, around 70%, would rather use documentation than person-to-person help.
If you're the one who knows the new process and you're the one writing the instructions, they might seem obvious to you. But to someone who didn't take part in the design of the solution or the development of the instructions, it might seem like there are a few steps missing, like this wrap around a bar of soap. Get some paper, move your thumbs. Ah, beautiful swan. I can't help but thinking that they may have missed a couple steps.
I tried that last night. Mine doesn't look like that.
Chances are, if your process is more complicated than a bar of soap, you'll be creating some kind of documentation to show people how it works. Good documentation can mean the difference between fantastic results and terrible results. And documentation isn't just for new employees. Experienced employees or customers may use the documentation as a reference for steps or scenarios that they haven't used often or to solve a specific problem.
One of the keys to creating good documentation is to make the documentation complete and accurate while keeping it visual and simple. Leave it to IKEA to provide assembly instructions for living room forts. Not that we need instructions for building one, but IKEA, known for their simply illustrated furniture assembly manuals, has come up with some anyway. These instructions detail how to construct 6 different play forts using basic furnishings. Pretty cool idea, I think. Let's cover the 5 main elements that are required for really good process documentation. We'll start with the first one, style.
What are the rules for creating documents? Organizations create a variety of documents in the course of running a business. Invoices, sales literature, emails, spreadsheets, reports, and to keep things organized, there should be rules for creating these documents. Are there in-house templates for standard documentation? Is there an in-house style guide that needs to be followed? Should your new documents be date stamped? What are the procedures for sharing documents? If your organization has a style guide, make sure that your documentation is consistent with that guide. Most style guides will make it a lot easier for you because colors, fonts, icons are all decided for you. If you don't have a style guide or requirements for documentation, create a basic guideline for your own documentation and then keep consistent among the documents that you're creating. The user of your document will appreciate the consistent style, voice, and tone across your documentation.
The next element is visual. We live in a visual culture and most of us are more comfortable with visual media than with reading text. Try to use images, drawings, and videos where possible in your work instructions. Think about who will be using these instructions and work towards making their lives better. It's much more effective to show than it is to tell. Visual content such as pictures, screenshots with notes, graphics, or videos can quickly show how things work. We don't have to read about it if we can see it. Visual content also helps to eliminate or at least break up big chunks of text. There's a concept called Simplified User Interface, or SUI, that refers to simplifying instructional graphics for users. So a screenshot like this one showing a drop-down menu goes from this to this. The ideal is to remove the unnecessary information or clutter and allow the user to focus only on the info that is necessary. Documentation can quickly go from here's how to use this if you're unfamiliar and have limited experience to here's an unedited transcript of everything our engineer has told us about this obscure application. One is going to get you using the product right away, while the other will result in a lot of wasted time and frustration. Documentation about the new process isn't just about capturing information. It's about presenting it in a way that's easy to read, usable, and actually helpful for your audience.
So it's great having work instructions, but what use are they if they're hard to find, or if they're only accessible from the office when they're needed in the factory floor? The people performing the work should have easy access to the work instructions when and where they need it. There are always costs associated with storage of any kind, but the largest cost for most businesses is the cost of time wasted when people are looking for documents. So the question is, how will documents be filed? Which brings us to the heart of document management. How can we simplify the access to the documents? Good filing practices can go a long way in solving the problem. For example, consistent naming conventions and searchable documents make information easier to find. It's always a good idea to create a file locations list to remind users where specific files should be stored and where to find them. Shared network or cloud drives should be labeled according to contents, just like we would with a physical cabinet with drawers. One of the key elements to making policies and standard operating procedures actually useful is to share your SOPs with your employees. While this sounds obvious, a lot of organizations create old-fashioned SOP documents and employee handbooks only to store them in a binder somewhere that lives in a file drawer with extra pens and Post-its, and only gets dusted off for the odd training or to add an update that nobody reads. Unless your employees can find, understand, and use your policies and SOPs to do real work, you get no value from having them at all.
Nothing will frustrate users more than reading something that doesn't make sense or that they don't understand. Nobody wants to feel stupid. Remember to write for the user. The concept sounds simple, but writing in plain language about a process that you know inside and out is much harder than it seems. You know all kinds of info that makes it natural for you to understand, but that's where it can get difficult. Don't assume that your users, that is the people working in or using your process, know all the technical or company buzzwords that you might be using too. You don't need to talk down to the users, but just remember that they may need extra help to be as productive as possible quickly.
Keep the documentation as simple as possible, but not any simpler. This is true for both the content and the design, or the look and feel. Huge paragraphs of small font are not user-friendly and can quickly feel overwhelming when looking for answers. People who encounter complicated instructions are more likely to figure it out on their own, and that's how processes get more and more complicated and more variable over time.
The next consideration is complete and accurate. Your new process map might be really beautifully done, but what questions might need to be answered for someone using it as a reference? For example, how do we know it's time to start? What are the instructions to complete this step? Are the tools and information needed to complete the step accurate? What is the decision criteria? What are the likely scenarios that are not captured on the flowchart? If everyone using the new process were involved in the new design, that's great. But beware of the longer-term challenges when new people come into the process. A best practice is to test the process out with people who are unfamiliar with the process and see where they get hung up. Employees must view the work instructions as credible, helpful, and accurate. Otherwise, they're just another pile of work that goes to waste. Keep closely aligned with the people doing the work and make sure that the process documentation matches reality.
No matter the job, there are many opportunities to create better documentation. The better our documentation, the better the chances that our productivity will increase because the optimal process is always used. The right way to do things is always clear, so time is not lost trying to remember, trying to help, or creating your own personal workaround. And remember, it's not really about paper or digital, it's about accessibility and having the right information readily available when needed.
The document log template is a great tool to track the documents that you have created for your project and to make sure that you've done your best to meet the requirements for valuable documentation. The header portion of the template has a space to capture the process name and process owner. Then you'll notice that there is a space to capture the high-level steps in the process. This way you can align the documentation to the specific process steps. So if we have a job aid or visual aids or checklists for a specific step, we would log it in the documentation column and then check whether that document meets the standards for style, visual access, simplicity, and complete and accurate. The last column is a space to capture the owner of the document so that there is accountability for questions and updates.
Documentation on its own is a huge topic, but for an improvement project in the control phase, we're focused on finalizing our process documentation, the documents that describe how the newly improved process works. This one-point lesson provides a quick reference for the key elements to creating documents that are truly useful and valuable to the users.